OK, let's come back home now and get more on that announcement about the sign-off for Sydney's Badgerys Creek Airport. The Minister for Urban Infrastructure, Paul Fletcher, joins us now from Sydney. Minister, good morning.
Good morning, Michael.
What does this announcement actually mean?
Well, what we've announced today is that we'll be today making the airport plan. That's the formal approval to proceed with Western Sydney Airport at Badgerys Creek. And it sets out some of the key elements. There'll be a 3,700 metre runway, so that's large enough for aircraft up to and including an Airbus A380. There'll be a terminal that will cater for up to 10 million passengers a year. That's the traffic levels we expect to get to by the early to mid 2030s. And so this is really a critical step in being able to proceed with Western Sydney Airport. It builds on the environmental impact statement, which secured final approval a few weeks ago, and it really means that Western Sydney Airport is cleared for takeoff.
Lots of Sydney-siders have heard this story before, so best case scenario, Minister, when would Badgerys Creek Airport be up and running, that airport open for takeoff and landing?
It's scheduled to open in the mid-2020s, and so it's been very important that we get these critical approvals in place. All of that has to happen before construction can commence. On the 1,800 hectare site at Badgerys Creek, almost all of the existing structures have now been demolished, and even just this week there's some geotechnical survey work being done there in relation to a potential route for a rail connection. So there's an enormous amount of work already occurred and an enormous amount of work yet to do on this very large project. But it's very, very important for Western Sydney and for Sydney. It'll be about 9,000 jobs by 2030 or so at the airport. And of course, Sydney needs, the nation needs this additional aviation capacity. According to the joint study on the aviation needs of Sydney done under the last government, by 2027 Kingsford Smith Airport will have no additional slots available, and by the mid-2030s there'll be essentially no additional capacity available at Kingsford Smith. So it's very important for Sydney as the largest international gateway into Australia, and important for the nation. It will also offer convenient new travel options to people in Western Sydney. For about 2 million people, Western Sydney Airport will now be closer than Kingsford Smith Airport. So very important in terms of offering additional travel options, but also in terms of bringing jobs and driving economic opportunities, because airports around the world are typically catalysts for jobs and economic activity.
And speaking of travel options, you mentioned the rail corridor. Will a rail link be established in time for the opening of the first stage of the airport? Because lots of people need, and they don't necessarily live in Western Sydney, would need to get to and from the airport in a relatively cost-effective manner.
Well, look, at the opening there'll be excellent ground transport connectivity. The $3.6 billion Western Sydney infrastructure plan involves the upgrading of the Northern Road to 4 lanes all the way. There'll be a new M12 which will connect the M7 to the airport and thus link the airport into Sydney's freeway network, and of course buses, public transport over that. In relation to rail, the airport is being designed to be rail ready. There's a station box, that's to say an excavation for where a station can be built. There'll be a reserved corridor for rail across the airport itself, and the New South Wales and Australian governments are carrying out a joint scoping study into the rail needs of Western Sydney Airport, looking at what would be the right route for a rail connection, when should it be built, how much would it cost, how should it be paid for. That'll report to the two governments next year, and the Prime Minister has set the challenge for that scoping study. Could rail be ready when the airport opens, or if not, then how soon afterwards?
OK, and how soon, you talk about capacity being reached at Sydney Airport in the not too distant future, how soon would a second runway be needed at Badgerys Creek?
Well, certainly Badgerys Creek Airport, or Western Sydney Airport, is being planned for the long term. It's expected that between about 2040 and 2050 is when the second runway will be needed. And so certainly we are taking a long-term perspective here, but the first stage of the airport will involve a single runway and a terminal with capacity for about 10 million passengers. That should take us through to about the mid-2030s, but it is very important that we build in this longer-term capacity, and the plans as set out in the airport plan, which is being finally approved today do include provision for future growth.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Paul Fletcher, thank you very much for joining News Breakfast this morning.
Thanks, Mark.